Good morning, Shelbyville Church. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Graham Magee. I'm one of the elders in this church. We kind of rotate around. It's my turn. So Tom gets the most duties, but you did a fine job. Today, I want to talk about the man that talked with God face to face. Who do you think that might be? Moses. Yeah, I don't know who said it, but did right. Not many people in the Old Testament talked with God face to face. God talked through visions. He communicated through dreams. Angels came and delivered messages. But Moses stands out probably alone as a person who talked with God face to face. And today I want to kind of think about what it would take for us to develop a relationship with God in which we can talk to God face to face. You know, often when I've faced a real dilemma in my life and I wish I just knew which way to go, I don't know what the future holds, but I know God knows. If He would just talk to me, if He would just let me know which direction to go. And sometimes we so much feel like we're in the dark. So anyway, I want to see what lessons we can learn from the life of Moses. Now, Moses covers, according to what I've read, he's the third most talked about person in the Bible, after Jesus and after David. And I had originally planned on talking about a lot more, but you'd be here till early afternoon. So I'm going to just cut it down to a kind of shorten it as best I can. So first I'd like to kind of introduce who Moses was and how he got to be where God could talk with him face to face. And the first step in Moses' character development started at home. For those of you who homeschool your kids, Cassidy and Eric and Connie's not here, but that is the most crucial period in a person's life. That is the time that Moses developed his identity as a God-fearing person. He learned who he was as an Israelite. And it kind of got him started on the right path in life, because by the time he was 12, he was moved on to the court of Pharaoh, and his influence at home was kind of behind him at that point. So what he learned in those first few years was so important in developing his character. After Moses moved into Pharaoh's court, I'm sure that he attended the University of Pharaoh there. He learned a lot of leadership skills, things which would later on be very important in his life. He also thrown in with that, of course, was a lot of the mysticism which the people in those days practiced. And he also, I'm going to say, lived the right life of the rich and the famous. I'm sure everybody bowed and scraped to him as the possible future heir in the nation. And he learned a lot about commanding respect, and I'm sure that he developed a certain amount of entitlement there. It just kind of comes naturally with being rich and famous. And so Moses developed a lot of character traits in those years he spent with Pharaoh. And he was like 40 years old by the time he left there. So this was many years that he had to unlearn. God then moved him on into herding sheep for 40 years. And during that time, Moses learned a lot about being patient, about being kind, about being humble. The job of a shepherd wasn't very highly looked upon. It was kind of a low-down job. And moving from the court of Pharaoh to this humble position, I'm sure, was a kind of a slam for him. And I think that his thoughts of a grand exit out of Egypt, how he was going to save his people, because he had been taught from early age that he would be the one to lead Israel out of Egypt. And I'm sure those dreams kind of faded into the background. So, well, that's not going to happen now. I'm a failure in life. But God had plans for him, and God first kind of introduced himself to Moses at the burning bush. And Moses, first of all, had to learn respect. God told him, take off your shoes because you're on holy ground. And Moses by this time was a very meek person. I think his self-esteem was very low. And we don't really think about a meek person as being a good leader. We look at our presidential candidates, we see a lot of inflated egos, a lot of boasting. We see how they rule the roost. And the humble and meek people, where do they end up? They end up at the back of the line. They get trod on, they get pushed over. And you don't think of a meek person as being a good leader. The Bible says that Moses, of course he wrote the book, so it says Moses was the most meek person on the face of the earth at that time. So when God gave Moses the commission to go back to Egypt and to lead his people out, Moses turned the position down. He said, I'm not up to this task. Find somebody else. I'm a failure. I'm a shepherd. I'm going to read from Exodus 4, verses 12 and 13. Moses... Okay, so God said, now go, I will help you speak, because Moses was making excuses at that point. So I will help you speak and teach you what to say. But Moses said, pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else. So God said, yeah, okay, I will send your brother Aaron. And Aaron will help you share your speaking duties. And God said, you shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. So God says you won't be alone in this. He will speak to the people for you. And here's an interesting part. He says, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. So God is putting a lot of trust and a lot of responsibility on Moses when he commissions him. So Moses accepted the challenge, and as we are very familiar with the stories, he had the courage to face down Pharaoh, the leader of the world in those days. He had courage to face a rebellious and unbelieving nation. And in the power of God, he brought plagues down on Egypt. He split the Red Sea. And the list goes on and on. Moses became a mighty man, the kind of person you would not think of as meek. So how then was Moses meek? There's the time when his brother Aaron and sister Miriam decided that they were not getting the respect they needed. They said, is the Lord only speaking through Moses? Are we not also the leaders in Israel? And so they staged this little mini rebellion. So what did Moses do? Did he tell them, you get down where you're supposed to be and, take your position? I'm the leader here. No, Moses did nothing. He did not try to defend himself. that was where his meekness showed up. So Moses was very bold and very courageous when doing God's will. When it came to facing down Pharaoh and facing the challenges which the Israelites faced, he had God behind him and he was strong and courageous. When it came time to defend his own character, his own position, he did nothing. He did not try to defend himself. But he did have a defender. It wasn't long before God, the Bible says God heard these words, that Aaron and Miriam had spoken, and he came down and he summoned Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, the three of them, to the tabernacle. So if you've ever been called to the principal's office, this was the principal's office times 10. God is going to settle this problem once and for all. So when the three of them got to the temple, God called Moses and Aaron forward. He came down in a pillar of cloud and stood before them. This is what he said. From Numbers 12, I'm going to read. When there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, reveal myself to them in visions and speak to them in dreams. But this is not true of my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house, and we'll see more about that later on. With him I speak face to face, clearly and not in riddles. He sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And so Aaron and Miriam were put in their place very quickly by God. It says in verse 9, the anger of the Lord burned against them. That's a tough position to be in, I can tell you. And he left them. As soon as the presence of God had left, Miriam was covered in leprosy, a death sentence in those days. In horror, Moses and Aaron looked at her, and Miriam said, Moses, plead with God. Maybe he'll have mercy on Aaron. So Moses did. He asked God to heal Miriam. God said, okay, you have pleaded on her behalf and I will heal her. But she is going to be banished for 7 days from the camp. And this was a time out for Miriam, a time she could go sit by herself and think things over. So for 7 days, the Israelites just stayed where they were while Miriam did her time out. And so Moses was very meek when defending himself, but very courageous when doing the will of God. And this is something that we can try to do ourselves. We should have courage when we know that we are doing the will of God. 1 Peter 5, 6, and 7. And if you know me, I will pull these few verses into a sermon if I can, wherever. I'll pick up in the middle of verse 5. God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due season, in due time. Cast all your anxiety upon him, because he cares for you. This is a wonderful promise. And when I'm faced with anxiety and faced with challenges, this is a verse that I can fall back on. Just humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, because he cares for you. He's got your back. He will raise you up and he will lead you. So the Israelites were allowed to leave Egypt. They passed through the Red Sea. But they did not head for Canaan initially. God had to kind of introduce himself to these people who had been in slavery for 400 years. They kind of lost track of who God was. They didn't really understand what sort of a God they served. They were still half heathens. And so they headed for Sinai. Sinai was the mountain of God, and God was going to reveal himself there. So I'm going to read some sections that cover this. It's mostly from Exodus chapter 19 and Exodus 20. And it talks about how God revealed himself to Israel. I'm going to read from Exodus 19, starting in verse 9. The Lord said to Moses, I am going to come to you in a dense cloud, so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you. So God says, I'm going to impress these people that you are my messenger. So Moses instructed the people for 3 days, you guys need to get your lives in order. Start to cleanse yourselves, take a bath, wash your clothes, do some soul searching, and in 3 days the Lord is going to come and reveal himself to you. On the morning of the third day, I'm reading from verse 16. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. So this is not the trumpet of the priest, this is the trumpet of the Lord, very loud. Everyone in the camp trembled. So this was an awesome experience for them. Everybody trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. So during these 3 days, they had set up a perimeter, a fence around a crime scene cordon around the mountain. And the instruction was that if any man or beast crossed over onto that holy ground, they would be put to death. And the Lord said, you don't go after them, you throw rocks at them. You'll stone them or shoot them with arrows, but they will die. So God impressed upon the people that the place where he was extremely holy. No person could cross it and live. So here the people are, they've gathered around the mountain here to meet with God. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace. I don't know if you guys have ever seen smoke from a furnace, but it's a thick or bunch of burning, I kind of picture burning tires, just this black boiling cloud of burning oil, black boiling cloud of smoke coming up. So the smoke billowed up from it like a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently, so the ground shook. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, if you can imagine that, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. Very awesome experience. I'm sure that knees were knocking together during that experience. And then God spoke these words. I am the Lord your God. We're reading in Exodus chapter 20, a chapter which we all know very well. I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of their parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who uses his name in vain. And so God proceeded with the 10 commandments as we know them. So how did the people take it? I read in verse 18 of Exodus 20. When the people saw the thunder and the lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance. And this is what they said to Moses. Speak to us yourself, and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us, or we will die. The people were totally terrified, totally cowed of this God who presented himself at Mount Sinai. They said to Moses, you talk to us, and we'll listen and we'll obey, but God is just too much. So then God called Moses up the mountain, and God was to give him the 10 Commandments. He was going to write them on 2 tablets of stone, written on both sides. So the 10 Commandments, you see them written on 2 sides, but the 10 Commandments in the Bible are written on both sides of the stone, of the tablets of stone. And God also gave Moses a huge amount of other instruction while he was up there. The Bible tells us that Moses remained there for 40 days and 40 nights. So as the days stretched on, the people were in the valley below. They must have had plenty of time to think. God terrified them. They had seen his power here on the mountain. They had seen him when he split the waters of the Red Sea, gave him a clear path to walk through. He saw the terrible plagues that he had poured down on Egypt. And so it was all very, very overwhelming. And so they started thinking, maybe we need to find ourselves a God that's not so demanding on us. We can find a God that's, that doesn't make us quake in our shoes. And so they came to Aaron. They said, make us a god of gold. Maybe a god of gold will be less demanding of us. So I'm going to read from Exodus 32. So skipping ahead quite a few chapters. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. So the people were ready to drop Moses pretty quickly. Aaron answered them, take off the gold earrings of your wife and your sons and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, and he fashioned it with a tool. Then they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. So how long did it take for Israel to drop the God who made them and pick up an idol? Not very long. It was still fresh in their minds who the real God was, but it was just too much for them. And so the golden calf was set up before the people. Aaron, the high priest, made sacrifices to this golden calf, and the people rose up to play. And I can imagine it was pretty rowdy. So here was a God the people could relate to. Here was a God who was fun. Didn't make him shake and tremble. So Aaron was second in command. You would think that of all the people in Israel, he would be the one most likely to stand firm for what he knew to be right, to be a man with some moral background, some moral backbone. But he was the perfect example of a wishy-washy leader, somebody who would not stand for the right, who would not take the difficult road. Aaron just followed the path of least resistance. I'm going to read a little well-known section from the book Education by Ellen White, page 573. Here's what Aaron was not. The greatest want of the world is the want of men who will not be bought or sold, men who in their inmost souls are true and honest, men who do not fear to call sin by its right name, men whose conscience is as true to duty as the needle to the pole, men who will stand for the right, though the heavens fall. So this is a challenge. Are you that kind of person? Will you stand for the right, though the heavens fall? How often are we inclined to take that path of least resistance, to give in to social pressure? For those of you who are in school, you'll be faced with these pressures from your peers, from your fellow students to do things which you know are morally wrong. And the challenge that we have set before us, are we going to stand true to what we know is right, though the heavens fall? Are we going to stand true regardless of the consequences? Well, Aaron was not that person. Now, up on the mountain were God and Moses. This was now 40 days. 40 days had passed by. Was God taken by surprise that the Israelites? No, God can see the future. And he knew exactly what was happening down there. But he informed Moses. And the Lord said to Moses, and we're reading from verse 7 in Exodus 32. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people, whom you brought out of Egypt, have become corrupt." Now, up until now, these were God's people. In front of Pharaoh, Moses said in God's behalf, "Let my people go." God was delivering his people from Egypt. Now God appears to have abandoned them. He told Moses, "Look at your people down there. See what they're doing." Have you ever seen a father or a mother watch their kid do some dumb or stupid thing? Mother says to the father, "Look what your son is doing." Kind of disown them. It's almost like God is disowning his child here in this case. God goes on. "They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them, and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it, and have said, 'These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.' I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses. "They are a stiff-necked people." I looked up stiff-necked, see what it means, and it means stubborn, intracted. They're set in their ways, they're not going to change. "Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn." So God's telling Moses, just step aside, I'm going to wipe them out. "That my anger may burn against them, that I may destroy them." Then God said, "I will make you, Moses, into a great nation." Moses replied, I think in my imagination I can see a small smile creeping over the face of God. I'm reading from verse 11. "But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. 'Lord,' he said, 'why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt, with great power and a mighty hand?'" So Moses is immediately turning the tables on God. So here is a person who had an amazing relationship with God. You know, who is going to turn the tables on God? You know, I think that Moses and God must have had a good rapport, a good relationship, something which you and I can only hope to have one day. And then Moses goes on in verse 12. "Why should the Egyptians say," Moses is talking to God. "Why should the Egyptians say, 'It was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains, to wipe them off the face of the earth?' Turn from your fierce anger and relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, 'I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land that I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever.'" So Moses says, "God, you will look bad if you wipe them out. it will be registered as a failure on your part if you don't keep your word. Moses was very zealous to defend the reputation of God. It was as if God and Moses were on the same team. They were on the same side. They had each other's backs. God looked out for Moses' reputation when he was challenged, and Moses looked out for God's reputation. That is a kind of a team that I'd like to be on. I would like my life and your life to defend the reputation of God. I would like to be on the same side as God. To the world around us, you and I are on a pedestal. People judge God by the way we act. If we act selfishly and unkindly, God is dishonored. If we act in the best interests of those about us, God is honored. And if we ask God for help, the Holy Spirit can help us to reach that goal. In order for us to be zealous for the reputation of God, we need to defend Him with our lives. The way that you and I live is going to tell everyone around us he is with God or he is against God. So Moses headed down the mountain carrying the 2 tablets of stone with the holy law engraved on both sides. I'm going to have to kind of skip through this. I see we're out of time. Moses was very distraught when he saw what was going on down the camp. The 2 tablets of stone he was carrying, the 10 Commandments written with God's own finger. He smashed them on the ground, broke up into little bits and pieces. Moses challenged Aaron. What do you think is going on here? Aaron sounds like a child as he declares his innocence. They made me do it. I threw the gold into the fire and out came this calf. I'm as surprised as you are. So the people had been shown the holiness of God, and then they promptly failed. Their just rewards was death. Moses shows, once again, prefigures Jesus Christ. Moses told the Israelites, and he told Aaron, I am going to go back up to God. I am going to plead on your behalf. Maybe he won't wipe you out as you deserve. So Moses went back up to the Lord and said, Oh, what great sin these people have committed if they have made themselves gods of gold. But now please forgive their sin. But if not, Moses said, then blot me out of the book you have written. Of course, Moses could not atone for the sins of Israel. Only Jesus Christ could atone for the sins of you and I. But in a sense, Moses showed the people what God is doing for them. He is offering his life in place of our life as we deserve to die. I'm going to close today with John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. My prayer for you is that you will become a representative and a teammate of God, and that one day, Lord willing, you and I will speak with God face to face.